I'm surprised it's hitting me just now, as far as we are into 1977, and as clear as I've been in understanding at this point over several months with SIRENIA, we have not yet had an approach of Morten Veland's vocal talents in this album. But thank goodness for Delirium, I think we have a bit of a departure from that. At the very least, that's what the lyric page I'm looking at specifies, that there's a duality role shared between Morten Veland and Emmanuel Zoldan. And of course, Emmanuel's presence on this album has been wonderful to humor. I've absolutely loved hearing any aspect of her vocal talents, whether it be the dominant accent, or in general, there hasn't necessarily been an operatic flair, but there's been like a subtle vibration at times, but an exquisite range, high degree of delivery and proficiency. She's been great to humor, and she's, again, like I said, in prominent focus here, but Morten Veland, right, who I've raved about a lot in terms of that's what brought me into SIRENIA, was him. It was a connection point for Mortemia, and several months ago, you remember, I started my journey with them via Arcane Astral Aeons, and at this point, 20 tracks later, I've had a wonderful time humoring them with you. And I myself feel quite honored to be able to recognize such talents within the symphonic metal regard, especially in European attribution, them being Norway-based. I'm saying the baseline again for anyone who's approaching perhaps on a fresh name basis. Though at this point, I will give you a window, the navigation of where we're at right now. I've been delivering on my earlier stated promise of spotlighting 1977 in the remainder of the album beyond just the 3 singles we humored originally. And for those of you who are maybe approaching on a first name basis, you'll probably want to dig back a bit, because the entirety of the album thus far has been great. A fresh invention, certainly, and voice for SIRENIA. It's a bit of a departure in its softer execution and its intentionally dated feel that is quite retrospective in the way that we experience these pieces. But there's a high degree of reverence still, and the mainstay elements of SIRENIA's proficiency have not at all been lost. It's just cool to kind of see this reinvention of sorts taking place. Though the last track we humored, Dopamine, that dug back into strident SIRENIA roots. I mean, that really is like a throwback piece of energy, and connection to Mortemia as well. At least on key choice, it felt like one of the pieces off of the COVID Aftermath sessions. Like, it just fit in perfectly there, if you consider it with that regard. But if you're approaching on a first name basis, simply stated, maybe you want to dig back into the beginning of the album, and then come back to this video and return, and take the journey with me. It's been an honor to start that part. It's been an experience for me, and one that I was easily tempted into humoring, this being my first ever SIRENIA album in full that I'm enjoying with you. And I love that about music. It can be a great fellowship experience, especially in amplifying prominence of good art. And there is still that in the world, even if maybe we're in a mixed space these days with some expression models. Music, for me, has always delivered a first love in my life, and I love SIRENIA in presence of what I've been introduced to on behalf of every member's talents and their vision, their atmosphere with their pieces, and what the art that they've created. I've just really come to revere it. I hope you do too, if this is a fresh entrance for you. So, or maybe just an early steps journey. Let's humor Delirium together. I haven't looked at the lyrics in detail, so in every respect this is a very fresh impression of the song, but I have seen at least enough regard to consider that Morten is making an appearance here. That's great to hear. Again, his vocal styling, it's a little lower in range if you're not used to it. Bit of a growl, raspiness. I find it quite enamoring. It's a strong metal voice for sure, but dominant, I think you can kind of maybe subtly pick up on the accent, at least somewhat, but it's just that darker presence I quite like, and the duality between him and Emmanuel that we've seen in previous tracks explored before really works. I'm going to go ahead and launch Delirium, and we can be introduced to this song together. One track away from finishing up 1977, but it's been quite the journey thus far, and I've really delighted in taking it with you. Here we go. Nice entrance. I'm assuming that's Emmanuel doing the background echo on vocals. Nice riff structure. Good grounding, deeply satisfactory as a bass. Perfect. It's nice to have a return to that. Nice key departure. It's not as high of an operatic range, but it's got that lower It's in a more limited window. I appreciate it, though. Thank goodness you get a taste of it. Isn't she just someone fun to entertain if you've never been with her before? Nice higher twinge. Good choices here. Oh, I love the snarl. Especially that strings finish on the background, layered under the vocals. Perfect choices. This break is a bit different. I like that effect of the choir. Although the SIRENIA choir is not present on this album, it's nice to have that subtlety and delivery. Thank you. I've been begging for at least just a taste on the new album of it, and I will take that higher inflection. I love hearing the manual any way you get her, but that operatic flair, I've been begging for it. It's nicer to have a small little window, isn't it? That's a definitive Mortimer choice. And that whistle styling, man. The creativity of that piece. I love its ambition. That feels like a definitive return to mainstream SIRENIA. You know, it's interesting to consider the evolution of the album and now where we're sitting sort of in the wrap-up and that this returns to the main roots. That, yes, there's still an adventurism embodied, but the SIRENIA mainstay elements are taking more of a prominence in effect and use. It's not as subtle of a foundational presence here. It's right in the forefront. So if this is a fresh introduction for you, this does come across in construction as much more mainstream on delivery and execution. Specifically with Morton's vocals, I love hearing it. Again, that snarl and the lightness of it, the pitch, just it's perfect on entrance. And hearing again the intersections. Well, it's not like an intersection between the two overlapping, but in the approach and the mixture, right? The shared relationship on vocal stylings of Morton and Emmanuel, perfect blend. And you might think to yourself, like, how does scream vocals or anything of a raspy growl, mix with operatic? Doesn't it, though? Isn't it quite exquisite to entertain? This album has taken on more of like a pop flair that's manifested in a softer delivery on behalf of Emmanuel, but her accent is still quite dominant in focus, and that French just, oh man, I love hearing it. Just any pitch where she sings at, I see her as a vocal angel, quite frankly. At this point, I've had 20 entrances to her talents, and I've just become a big fan of hers. But the operatic, I've been begging for that, and you just get a small taste. I mean, we got one more track to go, so maybe it'll broaden out. I don't know for sure. I'll be fine with it, I'm sure, either way, because each piece for me has been quite pleasing, but it's just nice to have at least one little window where that vibration kicks in and the higher pitch. The minute that hits, it's like, okay, yes, you gave me what I wanted. And it's not as prevalent on that album as is the first piece, but if you want reference, go back to Into the Night, Queen of Lies, what was the one I looked at? Oh, the 12th Hour in preparation, those last two pieces. I spotlight those intentionally because of the effect of Into the Night. I've never been able to forget about the operatic delivery there. It was such a nice twist of expectation. But to have a return to it here is quite nice, even if, again, it's so subtle and, it's just a small taste of it. I cannot express enough how much I appreciate that. The artistic choices on behalf of the musical construction here, like I said on tone, it is very mainstream SIRENIA. In the intensity, the scope, it has a definitive Mortemia connection, especially on certain attributes. That whistle pattern, the light keyboard approach, that area in the, I think in the development of the either pre or post bridge, I forget what it is, but that small, I've said many times, I'm a musical connoisseur. I'm not a trained musician by any means. So you'll forgive me, I'm sure, if I'm, delivering approximate terms, whereas others will be more adept in the language that they offer. For specificity's sake, this instrumental application comes in after, I believe, the guitar solo. Yeah. Right before the French intercedes. It's just it's really different. I like the individual contrast here. It's almost like what is the instrument I'm thinking of? There's a hollowness to it, but on the musicality side, it's just so beautifully defined. I love that intrusion. It just adds, again, like I said, it's such an interesting personality effect. So if you're looking for a piece that is very mainstream SIRENIA but still expresses a high degree of adventurism, that's Delirium. Probably, I really liked Dopamine, and I've liked every piece on this album for sure, but I really liked that last piece. I'm tempted to say I'm actually won over a little more by this one, namely just because, again, of the operatic intrusion. It's at the very least of equal standing and favorability. I don't know. You bring that in, you win me over. By the way, the subtlety of the choir intersection, because again, the Sirenian choir is not on presence here, it's a nice effect that, again, is very reminiscent of that. So it's a fitting illusion. But it really feels like we're, especially on these later tracks, we're going full-scale Sirenia. I appreciate the delivery here. Again, this album has been very different in its ambition, specific in focus, but I'm really loving the journey. And again, generally, this is my first ever Sirenia album. And I really did want to enjoy the experience with you. And that's what we're doing, fully, with its evolution. And I'm glad I did. Especially in retrospect, it would have been cool maybe to spotlight some of the other albums in entirety had I discovered Sirenia earlier, and had I been showcasing music, in years past, to the extent that I am today. But this album specifically, I'm grateful that I chose this one in particular, because again, it is so different. It'll be interesting going forward if future Sirenia projects make a return to mainstay structure to reflect on this one, and see maybe where points are discovered of new interest to the group following the debut here. I don't know. But it's an interesting one to consider. I'm grateful that I chose 1977, especially for pieces for the sake of, Delirium. Thank goodness. I'd be able to check that one out. It's like I've been begging for more operatic, and I get at least just a small window of it. And if this is your first impression of Sirenia, I hope you had a good time with it. And again, I would recommend, if you haven't, going back into the entirety of 1977. We have one more track left that we're going to listen to together on a first impression basis. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, from whatever perspective you come from as well. Fresh listen, longtime Sirenia fan, I welcome everybody. What are your thoughts thus far on the album? One of my favorite pieces for sure. Again, I don't know, Dopamine was really good too. In fact, I actually re-listened to the entire album today, from what I'd heard of it just in preparation, minus these two pieces, because I did take a break over the last night, but since Dopamine. But I'm reminded again of just how exquisite those original singles were. But these new pieces, man, I'm really liking again how we get to the end of the album, and there's a return to the familiar. If that was an envisioned effect, or if that's just a happy coincidence, I don't know, but I'm liking that feeling, and it's gelling quite well for somebody, again, who's deeply favored Sirenia. It's so nice to have that foundational emphasis return. Even amidst great adventurism, I appreciate that lens of support coming back in. It's a great reminder for why I've come to like Sirenia in the first place, and from my introduction onward. I've just had such a great time spotlighting this group and being honored by their presences, and Delirium is an excellent testament to why I love them so much. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you bounce, feel free to drop a like and comment, subscribe to this channel with a ding on the bell, and share this video with your friends. And consider checking out the description here. There you'll find links to my other channels, as well as addresses to my other social media accounts and ways you can help support my work if you feel so inclined. May God bless you, and looking forward to when our paths cross again.